They thought they could steal everything from me, my parents' trust, my future, even the inheritance. But when I uncovered their twisted plan and exposed the truth, their world shattered in front of everyone. I never thought my own sister would be the one to shatter the fragile trust one had in family. Families fight, they argue, they fall out for stupid reasons. But what she did went beyond anything I could have imagined. That it all started with small things, details that most people would brush off. She had been married for years, trying to hold her relationship together while everyone could see the cracks spreading through it. Her husband was distant, distracted, like he was halfway out the door. And then, almost overnight, things seemed to change. Suddenly, she was radiant again, clinging to him. And he was attentive. Almost too attentive. At first, I didn't question it. Couples have ups and downs, right? But then, her joy seemed to revolve around something else, something she wasn't saying. The way she'd glance at me when she held her baby, the way she'd stiffen whenever I talked about my own child. It was subtle, but it made my stomach twist. I brushed it aside. I told myself I was overthinking. But deep down, a quiet voice kept whispering that something was terribly wrong. The doubts kept clawing at me, no matter how hard I tried to push them away. I started noticing patterns, tiny, almost invisible threads that pulled together into something far darker. My sister's husband had always been a little cold toward me, like he tolerated me only because of her. But now, whenever I visited their house, he would avoid eye contact completely. He barely spoke to me, except for the occasional forced hello. His hands trembled when he poured a drink, his jaw tightened when I was in the same room. And then there was my sister. She used to lean on me for everything, her problems, her worries, her fears. Suddenly, that connection was gone. She was guarded, like she had locked a door inside herself and thrown away the key. Around me, her smile looked painted on, fragile and fake, as if she was terrified I'd see what lay beneath. The breaking point came one afternoon when I was holding her baby. As I looked into the child's eyes, something twisted in my gut. Those eyes weren't just familiar, they mirrored mine. The same color, the same shape, the same intensity one saw every morning in the mirror. That was the moment the whisper inside me turned into a scream. What if this child isn't his, but mine? Once the thought took hold, it refused to leave. It became a shadow that followed me everywhere. While I was at work, lying awake at night, even in moments when I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that I started replaying memories like broken records. Nights when my sister would call me over because her husband was away, the way she would cling to me after a fight, the times we both had too much to drink and lines blurred. I had buried those memories under excuses, telling myself it was harmless closeness, nothing more. But now, under the weight of this suspicion, they looked different, like puzzle pieces I had been too blind to fit together. The child's little smile haunted me. Every detail screamed familiarity. His crooked grin, the stubborn wrinkle in his forehead when he frowned, even the way he clasped his tiny fists, like he was ready to fight the world. These weren't just random traits. They were mine, but the real torment wasn't just the resemblance. It was the silence. My sister and her husband said nothing, acted as if life was perfectly normal. And the more they ignored me, the louder my doubts became. That I knew I couldn't keep drowning in paranoia. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. The longer I sat with the thought, the heavier it pressed against my chest. Every family gathering, every casual conversation with my sister, every smile that little boy flashed, it all became an unspoken accusation. My head was filled with questions that had no safe answers. That I started noticing things I had ignored before. When my nephew, if I could even call him that without choking, laughed, the sound carried a pitch and rhythm I knew too well. It reminded me of old home videos of myself, back when life felt innocent. My mother even mentioned once, almost absent-mindedly, "He sounds just like you did at that age." At the time, I laughed it off. Now it felt like an arrow driven straight into my gut. Even his habits betrayed me. He would wrinkle his nose whenever he disliked a smell, a quirk I had always been teased for. He hated wearing socks to bed, just like me. Small, almost ridiculous things, but when stacked together they formed a terrifying mosaic I couldn't unsee. That I found myself testing him without realizing it. I would hand him things in my left hand, waiting to see which hand he would naturally grab with. Sure enough, he reached with his left, like me, like almost no one else in my family. My heart pounded as though I had just uncovered a state secret. But if I was going to face this storm, I couldn't rely on coincidences alone. I needed more. Real evidence. Something I could not deny, even if I wanted to. So I began paying closer attention to my sister. I studied her words, the little pauses in her speech, the nervous flick of her eyes when her husband asked about the boy. I noticed how she stiffened when anyone mentioned resemblance. How quickly she would change the subject if someone compared the child to his father. It was subtle, but once I tuned into it, I couldn't stop hearing the lies between her words. Every night, I wrestled with the same dilemma: confront her and risk detonating the family, or keep digging in silence and let the truth poison me slowly. Neither choice felt survivable, yet I knew the day was coming when silence would no longer be an option, that I decided silence would kill me faster than the truth ever could. So I started collecting pieces, tiny fragments of reality that, when stitched together, might finally form a clear picture. The first place I turned was the family photo albums. They'd been sitting in dusty boxes in my parents' attic for years, barely touched except during rare nostalgic evenings. I pulled them down one by one, flipping through the yellowed pages as though they held the answers to a crime no one dared to name. It was almost sickening how quickly I saw it. My nephew's face mirrored mine at that same age with unnerving precision. The crooked smile, the uneven eyebrows, the faint dimple in the left cheek. Details that could easily be brushed off if there was only one or two, but not when they lined up perfectly picture after picture. Looking at those old snapshots, I felt like I was staring through time, watching my own reflection running through the yard, birthday cake smeared across my face, hair sticking up in that same stubborn cowlick. The deeper I dug, the more I noticed how others reacted. At gatherings, when relatives would remark on how much the boy resembled our family, my sister's husband always gave an awkward laugh, as if he didn't quite know what to say. My sister, on the other hand, always jumped in too quickly with comments like, "Oh, kids change every day, don't they?" Or "He's just a mix of everyone, I guess." Her tone was light, but the way her fingers twisted her wedding ring betrayed her. I started replaying old memories too. Nights when my sister seemed unusually distant. Times when she and I had long, private talks that now felt different in hindsight. Back then, I thought nothing of her confiding in me more than in her husband. But now it seemed like the puzzle pieces were shifting into place in ways I didn't want them to. Still, none of it was enough. Family photos, nervous glances, and quirks weren't proof. They were shadows, whispers, insinuations. If I wanted certainty, I'd have to step into dangerous territory. Something concrete, something undeniable. And so the thought began to grow inside me like a storm cloud. There was only one way to know for sure. DNA doesn't lie. Once the thought of DNA testing lodged itself in my mind, it refused to let go. It followed me everywhere. At work, in the car, even in the middle of the night when I stared at the ceiling replaying every memory with my sister and her son. Proof. That's what I needed. Not theories, not whispers, not glances exchanged at family dinners. Proof that would shatter the silence. But the question was, how could I get it? I couldn't exactly march up to my sister and demand a DNA test without detonating a bomb in the middle of our family. And I couldn't involve the child directly. He was innocent in all of this. The answer, I realized, lay in subtlety. Small, unnoticed acts. The boy was at our parents' house often, playing in the yard, snacking in the kitchen, leaving behind traces of himself without even realizing it. A half-finished juice box, a napkin he wiped his mouth with, even strands of hair caught in a brush my mother used when she insisted on fixing his messy hair before a family picture. One Sunday afternoon, when the house was filled with chatter and the chaos of cooking, I found my chance. My nephew had been drinking from a plastic cup, his fingerprints and saliva all over the rim. When he dashed outside to chase after the dog, he left the cup on the table. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. As I casually slid the cup into a plastic bag I'd hidden in my pocket, it felt surreal, standing there with that small piece of evidence, knowing what it represented. My palms were sweaty and my throat felt dry, but at the same time, an odd calmness washed over me. This was no longer just suspicion. This was the beginning of an answer. The ride home was a blur. I kept the bag in the glove compartment, glancing at it as though it might vanish. My mind raced with next steps. where to send it, how to keep it anonymous, how to ensure no one traced it back to me until I was ready. Every possibility came with risk, but the risk of continuing to live in uncertainty was worse. That night, alone in my apartment, I placed the cup in a small box, sealed it carefully, and labeled it in code only I would understand. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving forward instead of drowning in doubt. But even as I tried to convince myself I was closer to the truth, a darker thought clawed at me. What if I was right? What if this test confirmed the unthinkable? The following week became a careful balancing act between my ordinary life and the secret mission I had set in motion. Outwardly, I went to work, answered casual texts from friends, and attended a family dinner where my sister smiled as though everything in her world was perfectly aligned. But beneath the surface, I carried the weight of a sealed box that seemed to hum with silent accusations that I spent hours researching late at night, the glow of my laptop painting my apartment in cold light. DNA testing wasn't as straightforward as I had imagined. There were legal routes, medical labs, at-home kits that promised anonymity, and services that claimed results in weeks. Each option came with its own risks. If I involved a hospital, word might spread. If I used an at-home kit, would the results be credible enough to confront her? The fear of discovery gnawed at me. What if my sister noticed her son's missing cup? What if my parents grew suspicious of my behavior? Every interaction felt like walking across a thin sheet of ice, and I was terrified of the cracks forming beneath me. But the greater fear was the result itself. I replayed both possibilities in my head until it made me dizzy. If the boy was indeed my best friend's son, then every family gathering, every photo on the mantle, every memory was built on a lie so deep it poisoned everything. But if I was wrong, if the DNA showed no connection, then I would have branded my sister in my heart as a liar without reason. And that guilt would follow me forever. One night, staring at the box on my kitchen counter, I nearly threw it in the trash. The thought of not knowing almost felt safer than facing the truth. But then I remembered the strange hush of conversations ending as I walked into rooms. The way my sister and best friend shared subtle looks when they thought no one was watching. The gut-deep instinct I couldn't silence that I packaged the box carefully, labeled it under a false name, and mailed it to a private lab states away. Dropping it into the mailbox felt like crossing a point of no return. My hand lingered on the metal edge longer than necessary, as if pulling back was still an option. But the clang of the lid shutting sealed my fate. For the first time, the power wasn't in their hands. It was in mine. All I had to do now was wait. The waiting nearly destroyed me. Days dragged by like heavy chains. And every tick of the clock was another reminder that somewhere out there, in a sterile lab, strangers were carefully extracting answers to the question that haunted every beat of my heart, that I tried to bury myself in routine. Work, errands, small talk with colleagues. But beneath the thin mask of normalcy, I was unraveling. I would find myself staring blankly at my computer screen, rereading the same email 3 times before realizing I hadn't processed a word. At night, sleep evaded me. I lay in bed, replaying images of my sister holding her son, of my best friend's laughter during family barbecues, of the boy's eyes that seemed just a little too familiar. The paranoia was relentless. Every message my sister sent, innocent check-ins about dinner plans or casual updates about our parents, I read twice, searching for hidden meaning. Did she know what I had done? Was she watching me? And every interaction with my best friend felt poisoned. His jokes seemed forced, his silences suspicious. When he patted me on the back at a gathering, I flinched as though I'd been caught red-handed. I avoided family dinners, making excuses about work deadlines. I ignored calls from friends because I couldn't bear the idea of small talk when the truth pulsed so loudly in my veins. Even grocery shopping felt surreal, as though everyone around me knew something I didn't. I kept catching myself scanning faces, expecting to see judgment in their eyes, as if they too were in on some vast conspiracy. The worst part was the silence. No email, no phone call, no update from the lab. Just the echo of my own racing thoughts. I checked my inbox obsessively, refreshing the page every half hour, like the results could appear if I stared hard enough. Every day without an answer was another twist of the knife, another layer of doubt pressing down on me. And yet, in some dark corner of my mind, I dreaded the email finally arriving. Because once it did, there would be no going back. The fragile bubble of uncertainty would burst, and the truth, whatever it was, would stand bare and undeniable. By the end of the second week, I was a shadow of myself. Pale, restless, hollow-eyed. I found myself standing in front of the mirror one morning, gripping the sink so tightly my knuckles turned white. And I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. That I realized then that whatever the envelope contained, it wouldn't just reveal my sister's secret. It would decide the shape of the rest of my life. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, buried between spam promotions and work updates. First, I didn't even see it. My inbox was a blur after hours of obsessive refreshing. But then my eyes caught the subject line, confidential, DNA test results. My pulse spiked so violently I thought I might faint. The world around me blurred, the hum of the fridge, the muffled sounds of traffic outside, even the weight of my own body. All I could feel was the thundering drum of my heartbeat in my ears. I hovered the mouse over the message, my hand trembling. For weeks I had begged for this moment, cursed every second of waiting. And yet now, staring at that unopened email, I was paralyzed. Because once I clicked, my life would fracture into before and after. I got up, paced the room, sat back down. My palms were slick with sweat, the cursor dancing over the screen as if taunting me. I told myself to breathe, to calm down, but every breath came shallow and sharp. It felt like the walls of my apartment were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of the unknown. I thought about my sister, her laugh, her warmth, the way she always claimed family was sacred. I thought about my best friend, his trust, the bond we'd built since childhood. Could it all have been a lie? A performance designed to edge me out, to secure everything for themselves? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I clicked. The email expanded into view, but I couldn't bring myself to scroll. My vision blurred. My hands gripped the edge of the desk as if anchoring myself to reality. Point one movement, just one flick of my finger on the mouse wheel, stood between me and the truth. The silence in the room was unbearable. My throat was dry, my chest tight. I could almost hear the seconds ticking away, mocking me, daring me to face what I already feared. And then, with a deep, shaky breath, I scrolled down. The screen filled with lines of text, formal, sterile, the kind of clinical language that strips all emotion from the most devastating truths. I skimmed past the header, my eyes desperate, until they landed on the single sentence that shattered me. Probability of biological relation, 0%. For a moment, I couldn't even process it. My mind refused to absorb what my eyes were showing me. I reread the line once, twice, 10 times. Each repetition felt like a hammer striking the same fragile spot in my chest, until the cracks gave way and everything inside me caved. Point zero. Zero chance. My best friend wasn't just a betrayer. He was the father of the child I'd been told was mine. And my sister, she knew. She had to know. They had both built this elaborate lie, woven in secrecy, while smiling in my face and calling me family. The air felt poisonous. My throat clenched as if invisible hands were tightening around it. I staggered back from the desk, nearly tripping over the chair, clutching my stomach as if I might be sick. Memories assaulted me. Nights I'd spent talking about my dreams with him, the way my sister had defended me in family fights, the small reassurances that I wasn't alone in the world. Every moment of trust now corroded, reinterpreted as part of their act. That I wanted to scream, to break something, to call them both and unleash the rage boiling in me. But all I could do was collapse onto the couch, the email glowing in the background like some cruel reminder of how blind I had been. The silence was deafening. Yet in my head a storm raged, thoughts spinning faster than I could contain. How long had this been going on? Why me? What would my parents say when they found out? I had always believed betrayal was something distant, something that happened in books or on the news. But now it was mine, and I realized, in that suffocating silence, that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The rage inside me was volcanic, but beneath it, a strange clarity began to settle in. If I exploded now, if I stormed into their lives with accusations and fury, I'd look like the unstable one. They would twist my anger against me, just as they had twisted everything else. No, I couldn't give them that power. That I needed to be careful, precise. I needed to gather everything, the little cracks I had ignored, the inconsistencies in their stories, every scrap of evidence that showed what they had done to me. If I played this right, I could expose them so completely that there would be no room for denial, no chance to worm their way out of it, that I started making mental lists. My sister's sudden interest in our parents' finances. The way she always tried to shut down conversations about the will when I was around. The times my so-called best friend had disappeared with vague excuses, always aligning with her schedule. Even the subtle looks I'd caught between them. The ones I dismissed as coincidence that I realized how perfectly they had positioned themselves. My sister with her constant presence in our parents' home, shaping their perceptions, whispering in their ears. My best friend playing the role of loyal supporter to me, while secretly working against me behind my back. Together, they were painting me as the unreliable one, the reckless sibling, the one undeserving of trust or inheritance that I couldn't confront them yet. That would only push them to cover their tracks more carefully. I had to let them think they were winning, that their scheme was working, while I quietly assembled the truth piece by piece. For the first time since opening that email, I felt something other than despair. It was a cold, focused determination. They thought I was blind. They thought I would never see through them. But I was done being the fool in their story. It started small. Just a routine errand to my parents' house. Something I'd done 100 times before. But that day, everything felt sharper, like my senses had finally woken up. I moved through the house not as a son, but as an investigator walking through a crime scene that nobody else knew existed. On my father's desk, there was a stack of documents I'd never seen before. At first glance, they looked like routine financial papers, bank statements, insurance policies, but tucked between them was an envelope with my sister's handwriting. The moment I saw it, my heart started pounding. She'd been helping our father with paperwork for months now, and I'd thought nothing of it, but I slipped the envelope open carefully. Inside was a typed note that looked like a draft of a will. Not the old will I remembered seeing years ago. This was new, updated, cleaner. And the distribution. My stomach turned. My name was listed, but next to it in small print were the words, previously bequeathed assets reallocated. Everything, the house, the business shares, the savings, was going entirely to my sister. And there, in a small section at the bottom, was my best friend's name. Not as a beneficiary, but as an executor, the one who would manage the estate if anything happened to my parents. He'd been inserted into the family's most sensitive financial matters without my knowledge. I felt cold all over. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't speculation. This was a blueprint of exactly what I'd suspected, their entire plan, in black and white, right under my nose. Even worse, there was a handwritten note clipped to the draft. My sister's handwriting again, neat and composed. We need to finalize this before the end of the quarter. Don't mention anything to him yet. It's better if he finds out later, less resistance that way. That single line hit harder than anything else. Don't mention anything to him yet. She had been planning for me to be blindsided, planning for me to be powerless when everything was already signed and sealed. That I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, my hands trembling but my mind on fire. They thought they were clever. They thought they'd already won, but now I had proof. Real, undeniable proof. And with it, I could finally turn their own game against them. From that moment on, everything I did had to be deliberate. No more accusations, no more heated confrontations that would tip my hand. If my sister and my so-called best friend were going to cheat me out of my inheritance, then I would let them weave their web just tight enough to hang themselves in it. I started small. Each time I visited my parents, I paid attention to the little things, what papers were left out, what my sister helped with, how often my friend stopped by. I noticed patterns. She always arrived on Fridays with a new folder of financial updates. He always scheduled his friendly visits. Right after she left, I began quietly documenting everything. I took discreet photos of the draft will, the handwritten notes, the new account names appearing on my parents' statements. I saved text messages and emails, anything that even hinted at collusion. Late at night, I would sit at my kitchen table, spreading everything out like a detective in a crime drama. Dates, times, copies, cross-referencing what she told me with what I sawed at the same time. I worked on rebuilding my relationship with my parents. I offered to help with errands, started asking subtle questions about their future plans. Not to pressure them, but to keep myself in their orbit without seeming suspicious. The more trust one built, The more natural it would seem when I finally presented what I knew. I also reached out to a neutral person, my parents' longtime financial advisor. Under the guise of wanting advice about my own finances, I asked casual questions about the estate planning process, dropping enough hints to make him curious, but not enough to betray what I was really doing. To my quiet satisfaction, he confirmed some details that lined up perfectly with what I had found. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just greed. It was manipulation. My sister had been whispering stories about me to our parents for months. How unstable I was, how reckless with money. My friend had painted himself as the reliable executor, the one who would protect my parents' legacy. They weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were rewriting my entire identity in my parents' eyes, but I stayed calm. I smiled at family dinners. I congratulated my sister on her hard work with our parents' finances. I let my friend keep playing his part, because while they thought they were setting the trap, I was already building one of my own. The turning point came when I realized I finally had enough. The puzzle was complete. Every note, every forged suggestion, every whispered lie my sister and friend had fed my parents. It all lined up into a clear picture. They weren't just angling for money. They were orchestrating a full erasure of me from my family's story, but exposing them recklessly would risk my parents thinking I was bitter or paranoid. I needed precision. So, I coordinated quietly with the financial advisor. I arranged for a casual family update meeting, under the guise of reviewing some tax adjustments. My parents agreed, unaware of what was coming. My sister beamed, believing her schemes were safe. My friend even smirked when I offered to drive us all to the meeting. As though he already owned the outcome. In the days leading up, I rehearsed every step. I prepared folders, neat, labeled undeniable. Screenshots of their messages, photos of the altered drafts, timelines showing their overlapping visits. I knew if I presented it calmly, fact by fact, there would be no room left for excuses. The night before, though, I barely slept. I kept asking myself if I was ready for the fallout. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about trust, about years of friendship and family ties that would never recover. Part of me grieved what I was about to lose, even as another part of me sharpened with resolve. When the morning arrived, I felt strangely calm. My parents sat at the polished oak table in the advisor's office, sipping coffee. My sister straightened her blazer, radiating false confidence. My friend leaned back, too casual, already imagining the future where he held power over my family's wealth. And then it was my turn. I placed the first folder on the table, opened it, and said quietly but firmly, "There's something you need to see." The air shifted instantly, the kind of silence that prickled with electricity. My sister's smile faltered, my friend leaned forward, and my parents exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time, the stage was mine, not theirs. As the first pages slid across the table, I watched the confidence drain from their faces in slow motion. My sister's hand, perfectly manicured, hovered above the paper but didn't touch it, like she was afraid that the truth might burn her fingertips. My so-called best friend leaned forward, his smirk twitching, but his eyes darted nervously as the words and timestamps stared back at him in black and white. My parents frowned, scanning the evidence with furrowed brows. At first, they looked confused, unsure what they were even reading. That was exactly what I had planned. I didn't dump everything at once. Instead, I let it bleed out piece by piece, like drops of ink spreading across water. First, the messages that hinted at collusion. Then the altered drafts of the will with suspicious notes scribbled in the margins. Then the financial discrepancies that tied everything neatly together. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. But on the outside, I was calm, deliberate, almost surgical. Every pause I made forced them to sit in their own silence. Every explanation was short, sharp, and irrefutable. By the time I slid the final folder across the table, the one that tied my sister's visits and my friend's sudden advice sessions directly to each other, I could hear the shallow breaths around me. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as though the walls themselves had leaned in to witness the collapse of their carefully spun why sister finally broke the silence with a laugh that was far too brittle, muttering something about misunderstandings and taken out of context. My friend jumped in, his voice strained, trying to spin it as me being jealous, desperate, even paranoid. But their words bounced off the evidence like dull arrows against steel. For once, my parents weren't nodding along to their stories. For once, they weren't dismissing me. They were staring at the two people they trusted most, one a daughter, the other practically a son, and for the first time, doubt flickered in their eyes. And in that moment, I knew the tide had turned, that I could have ended it right there. The evidence was already overwhelming, the lies already crumbling. But a part of me, maybe the part that had spent months being dismissed, gaslit, and painted as the paranoid fool, wanted to twist the knife just a little deeper. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence hang, heavy and suffocating. My sister's forced laugh died in her throat, and my best friend's excuses stumbled into nothingness. My parents sat frozen, their eyes darting between us, torn between disbelief and the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, I had been right all along. That's when I pulled out the smallest, most dangerous piece of evidence. It wasn't a document or a bank record. It was something far more intimate. A recording. I pressed play, and their own voices filled the room. Whispered plans, mocking comments about how gullible our parents were. A casual acknowledgement that if I resisted, they'd paint me as unstable, the problem child. Their words, so careless when spoken in private, now hung in the air like poison. My sister's face drained of all color. My friend shifted in his seat, fists clenched on the table, as if sheer anger could erase the truth echoing from the tiny speaker. My parents didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than any outburst could have been. I let the recording play until the very end, until their laughter, so smug, so sure of themselves, faded into static. Then I looked at them both and said nothing. I didn't have to. The damage was done. And yet, the room wasn't boiling with chaos. It was worse. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes right before something irreversible breaks. The silence was unbearable, stretched so tight it felt like the walls themselves might split. My sister finally broke, slamming her hand on the table, her voice cracking as she tried to spin another excuse. But every word that left her mouth only dug her deeper. My best friend sat rigid, his mask of confidence gone, sweat beading at his temples as if the room had turned into a furnace. And then my father spoke. Just one sentence, calm but heavy with finality. We trusted you both. And you chose betrayal. It was like a hammer strike. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears, not for me, but for the realization that two people she had cherished, her own daughter and the boy she had treated like a son, had schemed so cruelly. The inheritance? The will? In that moment, none of it mattered to me. What mattered was the truth, laid bare in the ugliest way possible. The smug laughs that once haunted me had been dragged into the light. Stripped of their power, my parents stood on my side. Not because I forced them, not because I had demanded it, but because they could finally see. The web of lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. It all crumbled in a single evening. As for my sister and my so-called friend, their silence was louder than any apology could have been. They didn't beg. They didn't fight. They just sat there, staring at the wreckage of everything they'd tried to build. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The anger, the doubt, the constant weight of suspicion, gone. All that was left was the cold clarity of knowing I had fought for the truth, and one that I didn't need revenge. Their downfall was already complete, because sometimes the sharpest blade isn't anger. It's truth. And once it cuts, nothing is ever the same. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. That we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.